Joining us now is Nick Cafardo, Boston Globe, and the organ music in the background. We figure that Nick's in church right now, ready to talk to us. But
it's a cathedral. Yes.
The Cathedral Ballpark's right there, Fenway Park. Nick, your impressions of Dan Duquette as a career general manager with 3 different teams and what he's accomplished so far?
You know, I have to say that he's been a success story in Montreal. Of course, he came from a farm director's background and really groomed a lot of great players in Montreal. Unfortunately, they just didn't have the money there to keep any of them, so he was forced to trade some of them off. And then came to Boston, really a completely opposite situation, from the small market Expos to the big market Red Sox. And I'll say this about him. He adapted to that very well. He made some terrific long-term signings. Manny Ramirez, 8 years, $160 million. Traded for Pedro Martinez and then signed him long-term. Signed Johnny Damon, long-term deal. And, of course, he made that terrific deal where he obtained Derek Lowe and Jason Varitek for Heathcliff Slocum with the Seattle Mariners. The only thing he didn't do was win a championship, and after the new ownership took over here, the John Henry, Tom Warner regime, Dan was dismissed of his duties, and then 10 years out of the game. Nobody ever comes back after 10 years. He came back, and he's doing pretty well with the Orioles.
Nick, when you look at, I looked at your article, and it shows that, you mentioned Fred Ferreira, you mentioned Lee Thomas, and also Ray Poinevent, who had obviously a history going back probably even to someone in Milwaukee when Dan first started. How important were those guys coming in with him and kind of being his eyes and ears out there in different parts of the world to the success that he's had here in Baltimore?
Well, I was surprised by the names when they came back because, some of them had been out of baseball for a while or scouting and not in big roles after Dan left the Red Sox. So he was very loyal to these people, brought Lee Thomas back, and Lee, of course, was a great general manager for the Philadelphia Phillies for a long time, a great talent evaluator, and Ferreira in the international scene, Poitevant in Asia and internationally, all had great connections to a lot of people. And, Gary Rasich, another guy that he brought back, Ken Qualls, who was running his academy in the Berkshires, at the time. And they all came back, and they've all kind of worked together well. I mean, he trusts all of them, and he trusts their judgment, and it works well for them. And I think it's a remarkable story that they've all come together again after all these years.
And Nick, you mentioned also in the article about obviously not having the budget in Baltimore that he did in Boston, but the way he's been able to work with Buck Showalter, how important is that, and what does that say about the two guys that they're able to form this kind of relationship and build this team up to where they are today?
I think it's very important. I mean, we saw here in Boston when they had Bobby Valentine and Ben Sherrington, they just didn't get along. They were never on the same page. They had different ideas about things. They could never come together. So I think the manager-GM relationship is more important than ever. I think in this case, Buck Showalter is obviously a proven manager, maybe the best manager in baseball right now, and he's very, very strong-minded in the things he does and what he wants to do. Dan is the same way as a GM, and the fact that they've been able to, kind of mix together and survive together, I think is a great testament to both of them because they're both very strong-willed in what they want to do with a baseball team, and apparently they've been on the same page, at least for the most part. I'm sure there are things they disagree on, but in the end, I think Dan's job is to get Buck the players he needs to run a baseball team and to run a successful team that can win the AL East.
Nick, in May of 2009, I spent about 2 hours with Dan Duquette in the old ballpark, the historical ballpark in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, on the 150th anniversary of the first college baseball game between Amherst and Williams. And, of course, he was an alum, but he was not involved in professional baseball at that point in time. But in the course of our long conversation, it was clear that he'd kept up with everybody's organization. He knew every prime prospect in all 30 major league organizations. And you know, to me, and I kept saying, well, it sounds like you're priming yourself to get back in the game. And he kept saying, not yet, not yet. Well, obviously, he had opportunities, but he was not waiting for an assistant's job. He wanted the GM's job.
Yeah, you know, I think he turned down a couple of farm director jobs and you know, underling type jobs. You know, he really wanted to run a baseball team again. And I actually asked him that if he had kept up with Major League Baseball, and he said to some degree. I mean, he certainly knew as a fan what was going on. He kept up with the Red Sox because, you know, he had a lot of his you know, prospects that farm. You know, draft picks that had come up through the Red Sox system, and that 04 Red Sox team that eventually beat the curse and won after 86 years. A lot of those guys were his guys, so he was very proud of the fact that his guys were able to finally win a championship, even though he wasn't there. And I remember he traveled to all the World Series games that year. I saw him everywhere I went in 04 during the postseason. He was very proud of that team and really wanted to be a part of it. And I think once his youngest son, I think, got out of high school, that's when he really pressed to get back into the game. And don't forget, he had strong ties to Bud Selig. Bud Selig had hired him as a farm director with the Milwaukee Brewers years ago, and I'm sure Bud always kept him in mind for jobs along the way and recommended him strongly for things. And I think finally when Dan said, you know, it's time to get back in, you know, he got the interview with the Angels, that Jerry DiPoto eventually got that job. And then shortly thereafter, he got the interview with Baltimore, and the Angelos family had known him from the owners' meetings over the years, and then had talked to him and really liked him, and pulled the trigger.